Our next storyteller is Mary Jane Sullivan, who is a professor at UCCS, poet, and documentary filmmaker. Mary Jane.
After about 23 years in downtown Brooklyn, in a place that's now called Dumbo, I lived there when it wasn't, and 2 years in West Harlem, where I got to learn to live with the music of the street, I wound up in Norwood, last stop in the Bronx in the 205th D line, subletting for Irene McSorley, who was back in Belfast, a town that I spent 3 years in as well. And that morning, I woke without an alarm clock to an incredible light in this sort of a place I called the Outback. I used to call Norwood the Outback. And it was a changing neighborhood. It was a neighborhood now that, as I like to say, that was saffron and color and smells out the windows, and yet had that kind of Caribbean beat happening, meaning the Irish bars were closing. So, I had to go downtown. It was election day. We were going to vote for the mayor that day, and I have a little production office right there on the corner of Basie and Church, right across from World Trade 5 and Borders bookstore. And then Chambers Street was where I would walk down and I would vote. But before that, I had to go see my friend Connie, who was in the theater, and we were going to have a breakfast, very early breakfast, and we were going to talk about how do we create a very beautiful play about the migration north, of all the families whose families were a part of the slavery in the United States, the Great Migration. So I get on the train and I get down to 34th Street and said, I'm going to walk, because I love to walk. And I was kind of scattershot that morning. I mean, I've never saw a sky like that before. And I couldn't seem to find where I was going. I mean, how does one get lost in a city they know so well? They've lived all your adult life in. And so I kept walking and couldn't find the restaurant. So then I do what I always did unconsciously. I looked at my compass, and it was the towers. The Twin Towers were the compass. From every borough and from New Jersey onward, it was the compass. It's what you saw. And as I looked up at my compass, I saw also this huge open hole. It was like a moment, a flash, right when that moment when the plane went in and the North Tower, and also just it started to smoke and explosion happened. And I was standing there looking at my compass with a whole lot of other people looking at our compass, all looking in the same direction as we watched this. And little did I realize I was actually standing right next to the restaurant. So I turn around and I go in, and Connie's sitting there on the cell phone, and then she sees me and she says, we got hit. We just got hit. And I'm not the enemy. So I just sat there. I stopped speaking that day. And I just sat there, and then for a few minutes, and then heard a man scream outside the plate glass window. So I went out. And he was screaming as the second tower was hit. And all I could think of was, oh my God, I'm not working right there right now. I work the night shift on the 47th floor. As Bartley Scribner's sister, copy editing and proofreading legal documents. And I was like, oh my God, all these people that, I know and people I work for. And I was thinking, but then all of us thought that these people were just going to work that day, So Connie ran out as well, and she kept saying, like a mantra, I am not the enemy. I am not the enemy. And she disappeared. I couldn't talk to her. And then immediately, without even thinking, I started running to the hospital. And I got to the hospital, and I was the very first person there, but that lasted for about 10 seconds. And this woman stood next to me, and we introduced ourselves. And I told her my name was Mary Jane Sullivan. She told me her name was Michelle. And it was at that moment that the triage was being set up on the curb, and that all of the fire engines were going down 7th Avenue South, just headed for 7th Avenue South. And at that moment, in the middle of 7th Avenue South, was this beautiful young man with reddish-brown flowing hair, who was in, his high tops, his jeans, and his t-shirt with a backpack on, running, so his hair was flying, He was flying like the engines themselves, with that noise. And on top of the rooftop of that hospital annex, where it's a row of pigeons just staring down at all of us human beings, wondering, what's going on in your world right now? Something's happening. We understand that, But he was moving, and I just knew in an instant that, oh my God, he's running towards his love. It has to be. He has that look about him of trauma and terror, more terror than anything, that he wanted to make it down there. So after that moment, and I know Michelle saw it too, and everyone behind us, because now the lines were going down and around the block, I asked the hospital administrator, who was on the walkie-talkie in front of me, and I said, have you had any word of any people yet? Do you know what's going on? And he says, there's no word of survivors. And then he said, yet. And at that moment, and it was a bit of a while, and your eyes were just filled with this sort of classified toxic stuff, and it was going up your nose, I just said to Michelle, goodbye, it's a pleasure to meet you, take care of yourself. And I started walking. And walking almost on automatic pilot, but first I said, I have to call my family, So I call our family house, call collect. It's when you still had phones on the street. And I call my family house, and my sister Rosemary answers, and she says, hi. And I say, hey, it's MJ. And she goes, oh, you're alive, that's fantastic. And I said, yeah, I didn't work today, and I don't work in the towers anymore. I was laid off. And so then she said, well, we're really happy that you're alive, but we want you to know that Jazz, our family dog, died at 8:25 this morning. I was, like, oh, Jazz, who a year ago sat with my mother while she was passing, And then when they took her away, he sat in the library on the rug where she left, our home. Spiritually, just she left. So all I said then to my sister was, Rosemary, I gotta go. And I hung up, which was rude because it's not the way to do it, but I just hung up. I started walking, and I wound up on Greenwich Avenue, and I wound up walking all the way over to 23rd Street and 9th Avenue to London Towers. And I was headed to what Janet Cutting-Feldman said was her Colorado mountain in the sky, because she was from the Western Slope. And she was one of my mentors, and it was the day after her 81st birthday. And it was automatic that I would go there. I was always over there. So I went in, and Carlos let me in, and I went up to the 16th floor, and she had lived in this place for 54 years. And I greeted her at the door, and we held each other, and then I went into the dining room, and then, because she lived in this, people call it a penthouse, for her it was, it was a part of a cooperative out in the 40s, and 360 degrees around, in which you could see all of the city, you could see everything. So I went through there, and I went to the south side, and in this amazingly incredible garden, centered by a peace pole in 7 languages. And I just looked, and I couldn't say anything. Meanwhile, she was like in the bedroom, just looking at CNN, like so many of us were at some point. And after the 14th time of the looping of the hit, we turned it off. And yet at the same time, we all have to understand, because for those of us who saw it, it was like, it's a little removed, but then again, it was also, the TV was a witness for so many of us. So we continued being very quiet, and so the next day, I decided, I feel so, I'm shaking, and my heart is beating very fast, and I said, I just have to go out. And I went for a long walk, and you couldn't go down past 14th Street because it looked like a military occupation. And it's some other war zone, Belfast or Sarajevo, places I'd been to. And so I walked over to 16th Street, and all I could think about, all I could do was to pray. So I went to St. Francis Xavier, which was a really extraordinary Catholic church based in liberation theology. And I walked in, and so many other people were walking in, and we all just kneeled down. And I knelt right in front of the tribute to Oscar Romero and the Salvadoran martyrs. And I just cried and prayed, and then left. And it was a constant flow of people, the doors were open, and then walked even further east to Union Square. Union Square is our Trafalgar Square. That's where you go when something needs to be said or something happens. And when I went over there, it was so crowded with people. And we were either holding each other, attempting to sing songs, or just speak to each other, finding friends, even people who are not quite yet friends, or strangers becoming friends. And there wasn't one place of signage that didn't have a person's face and the fact that they were missing. Everywhere. The same as Don was saying, exact same thing. So I did that, like a ritual. And it became a ritual for so many of us because none of us could go home if we were there. No trains were working, whatever. So that night I went back, and on the north side of Janice's Colorado mountain, I just looked down, and that was the street where all the ambulances were very quietly, going down with body parts and to the makeshift morgue. And I thought of that night, I thought of the young Thomas, who I worked with in the night shifts at these various places in New York City to make income so I could do my work. It was like Thomas never had a family, he was a foster child, and I in some way became an adult aunt to him. So I thought, oh my God, he worked in the towers. So the next morning, I say to Janet, here's what we're going to do. We're going over to Chelsea Piers, where people were actually going to, so the city could record the names of their missing relatives. And I said, you're the grandmother and I'm the mother. And she says, that's a lie. And I said, well, Thomas doesn't have a family. So we went. So we went over, and there was a lot of crowds on West Side Highway. And we went in, and it was like an auditorium. It was like a basketball auditorium but there was no games going on. There was no kind of cheering. It was utter silence. There was tarpaulin on the floor, and these long tables where city workers were bringing people forward to please give the name of the missing person. What is the relationship? Where do you live? Date of birth, etc. And the police department was compiling all of this information. So after that, Janice, we come out, and Janice said, I'm going to take you to someplace special. We said, let's go out. And at that moment, there were people cheering. And I said, what are they cheering about? What's this, all of this cheering about? And it was heavy equipment, dump trucks, all kinds of trucks. And I looked at the license plates: West Virginia, Illinois, Louisiana, North Dakota, Oregon, California. People were coming to go to the pile, which is what we were beginning to call it, calling it the pile. And so the cheering was like really this sense of unity, the sense of all of us together, and every one of these trucks had an American flag. And if you remember, everybody was flying a flag on their cars too at that time. At that point, then Janice was like saying to me, she says, okay, MJ, let's just go. I got a place I want to take you here, right here on the piers, and let's go up to the 40-foot yawl with a broken mast, and sit down. And she was beginning to talk a little bit, but not really talking a lot. So we go up there and we sit. And it's the Hudson River. And if you don't want to know something special about the Hudson River, and the ancient Indians knew this, it's the river that flows both ways. to watch the water flows both ways. And knowing that too, was this fact was that at the time, that there were I don't know if they're F-17, 18s or advanced F, whatever they are, fighter jets, were skimming above the water, just going around the city, coming back, and going around again. And they were parallel to her, and I was waiting for her to tell me something. I needed to hear something from this person who meant so much to me. So then she started, I said, I didn't have to say anything, but then she picked up cigarettes. Janet, when did you start smoking Marlboros, and she said, well, when we were young, we had a lot of fun, but it's, and she told me about stuff that happened in her generation. When she was 81, she was born in 1920. So she said, look, during World War II, I worked for the Labor Relations Board in Washington, and there were not that many women, in that kind of position, and yet women were like, Rosie the Riveter, etc. And then she said, and I came to New York, and I met my husband, and I told him the Colorado girl's got to be up in the sky. So he found this home for us, and I raised my children there. And I also worked for the mayor for transportation and labor rights. I worked with Eleanor Roosevelt, as you well know, on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm sitting here today, and I'm looking at my city. And I want you to know that this city needs to stay alive. This city needs to move forward, but we also have to understand what's happened to us. We also have to understand tolerance, compassion, and hope, really radical hope for what we can accomplish. And I felt that she told me what I really needed to hear. And then that night, for the first time I was staying with her, I stayed in the back room by the solarium. And it was, I know it was somewhere around 2 o'clock, because I always wake up around then. And there was this huge kind of bang at the solarium door, so I went out, again, facing south on the garden. And what it was, I will never forget it. It was Job's whirlwind, in a way. And what it was this incredible wind that was coming over southern Manhattan, across the waters, over again to Brooklyn, and again, to pretty much southern Brooklyn. And all I could think of was that, and I said it out loud to the wind itself, the souls are leaving, the souls are leaving. This is where they're making their discernment about where they're going, and they're leaving, and we're here. And it is us who have to carry them with us from now on. That's it.